Realism. We're going to start to move into some writing that may be more relatable to you, even more familiar. Realism is still a movement that's happening now. Reality TV. Realism is a movement in art first, which started in the mid-19th century in France and later spread throughout the world. And as I mentioned before, these literary periods are artistic periods, things that were happening together. Artists, writers, philosophers were all affected by these movements. So the way that artists were affected is similar to the way that writers were affected. Well, how did writers incorporate realism in their writing? Realism entered literature at almost the same time as it entered art. Its real objective was to root out those fantastical things, those marvelous, sometimes seemingly ridiculous or over-the-top romantic parts of literature. And they wanted to replace, instead, very real aspects. So instead of sugarcoating everything and having all these beautiful, refined characters, now the tide was pushing against that. People wanted to see what was real. In literature, writers use realism as a literary technique to describe story elements, such as setting, characters, themes. Writers won't use elaborate imagery or figurative language, such as similes and metaphors. Through realism, writers explain things without decorative language or sugarcoating the events. Realism is something completely opposite and contradictory to romanticism and idealism. Examples of this, some of them are even clear in the title. Charles Dickens's David Copperfield and Oliver Twist, and Great Expectations. Very real stories of characters that have flaws. George Eliot was actually Mary Ann Stevens. Remember that. She was writing under the pen name of George Eliot, and she wrote Middlemarch. Oscar Wilde's The Importance of Being Earnest was a satire on upperclassism and full of Wilde's own aphorisms. Henrik Ibsen's A Doll's House questioned roles of men and women in society and marriage. Thomas Hardy wrote Tess of the D'Urbervilles and Jude the Obscure, which were very controversial as they started to cross the line regarding sensuality and sexuality in literature. And Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights was about an orphan named Heathcliff. She started to begin writing against the novel of manners that most women writers were writing, like Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility. Wuthering Heights was different. Instead of portraying characters as refined, contained, controlled women and men, she started to portray them more realistically. The language in realism the rule is this: it's not important to write beautifully, but to write it so it's understood. So the writing became more efficient. Less adjectives were used, less flowery language. Instead, what was more important was the motivation to get to the story, the point, the characters, the grittiness. Similar to the way that we saw the picaresque novels and those rascal characters that don't even change completely. That's how realism is. Here's an excerpt from Wuthering Heights so that we can examine the language. Mr. Hindley came home to the funeral, and a thing that amazed us and set the neighbors gossiping right and left. He brought a wife with him. What she was and where she was born, he never informed us. Probably she had neither money nor name to recommend her, or he would scarcely have kept the union from his father. She was not one that would have disturbed the house much on her own account. Every object she saw the moment she crossed the threshold appeared to delight her, and every circumstance that took place about her, except the preparing for the burial and the presence of the mourners. I thought she was half silly from her behavior. While that went on, she ran into her chamber and made me come with her, though I should have been dressing the children. And there she sat, shivering and clasping her hands and asking repeatedly, "Are they gone yet? Are they gone yet?" Then she began describing with hysterical emotion the effect it produced on her to see black, and started and trembled, and at last fell a-weeping. And when I asked what was the matter, answered she didn't know, but she felt so afraid of dying. Let's look at the way that this is written again. Do you see the plain language and the references to things that would not be in an Austen book? First, the gossiping and the secrets, the bad places that she might have come from, the way that she disturbed things, the way that they examine her character, every circumstance that took place about her, that she was so over-the-top emotional. The way that Bronte describes her is half silly from her behavior. And even the narrator says, "She made me come with her, though I should have been dressing the children." This seems like a very realistic novel that we would even read today. These two authors, however, were against the tide of realism. They didn't want to let romanticism and idealism go. So during the period of realism, they wrote against it, and they published these. Lewis Carroll published Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass, which takes place 6 months after Alice returns from Wonderland. Robert Louis Stevenson wrote The Body Snatcher, Treasure Island, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which I'm sure you are familiar with. Robert Browning's poetry, The Ring and The Book, was also against the realism tide, as well as Tennyson's Ulysses and The Lotus Eaters. Remember, these were that against realism, okay? They were still trapped in romantic and idealistic beliefs and didn't want to transfer over to the realism side yet. Here's some more examples. The Turn of the Screw and Portrait of a Lady by Henry James. Remember the picaresque novels that I spoke about earlier and how they were also realistic? Well, here they are again by Mark Twain. Anna Karenina and War and Peace was written by Leo Tolstoy, and Madame Bovary by Gustave Flaubert. Another controversial book was Lady Chatterley's Lover and Sons and Lovers, both written by D.H. Lawrence. And you'll remember the excerpt that I read earlier of A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, and the wonderful example of antithesis that it was, and how real that opening was. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. You are going to have to differentiate in this unit between those that are realistic and those that stayed non-realistic and romantic and idealistic. I know it's a lot to remember. I know there are a ton of authors and a ton of titles, but trust me, as you continue to review the lectures, be patient with yourself. Learning takes time. You're not just going to remember this for the exam. You will remember this for the rest of your life. So allow it to affect you, allow it to grow you, and learn from that perspective. Don't just learn for taking the exam, because that'll put too much pressure on you. If you learn for yourself, the information will become part of who you are. Take the study questions at the end of this unit and see how much you learned so far.